Right now, there are people alive because a surgeon can open a human chest, reach inside, and repair a beating heart. That surgery, cardiac surgery, is performed hundreds of thousands of times a year. Ask anyone who pioneered it. Most people will name a white physician from Alabama. They're wrong. The man who first proved it could be done was a black surgeon from Chicago named Daniel Hale Williams. He did it in 1893 in a hospital he had built himself because no other hospital in the city would let him practice. He saved a man's life using a technique no one had ever attempted in recorded medical history. And when the century turned, when the textbooks were written and the credit was handed out, his name was left off the page. This is the story of what he did, what was taken from him, and why it matters that we say his name correctly. Daniel Hale Williams was born in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, in 1856. He was the fifth of 7 children. His father died when Daniel was 11. His mother, unable to support the family alone, dispersed her children across relatives and acquaintances, and Daniel found himself largely on his own before he was a teenager. He was apprenticed to a shoemaker in Baltimore. He worked as a barber in Wisconsin. Neither path suited him. What did suit him was the mind of a doctor. In Janesville, Wisconsin, a physician named Henry Palmer took the young man on as an apprentice, a legitimate form of medical education in that era, and Williams eventually enrolled at Chicago Medical College, the institution that would later become Northwestern University's medical school. He graduated in 1883. He was 27 years old. He was licensed, trained, and capable. And he entered a medical world that had no intention of accommodating him. In 1880s Chicago, black physicians could not obtain hospital appointments. They could not perform surgery in mainstream institutions. They could not train black nurses because nursing schools would not admit black students. Williams saw this not as an obstacle to navigate around, but as a structure to dismantle from within. In 1891, he founded Provident Hospital and Training School on Chicago's South Side, the first hospital in the United States to be staffed interracially, and the first to train black nurses in an accredited program. Let that settle for a moment. He didn't just want to practice medicine. He wanted to build the infrastructure that would let others practice it, too. Provident Hospital was not a workaround. It was an act of institutional architecture, built on moral conviction and remarkable organizational skill. Williams raised funds across racial lines, recruited doctors white and black, and established a place where surgical training could happen regardless of the color of the hands holding the instruments. And it was in that hospital, the one he built because he was excluded from every other, that he performed the operation that changed medicine. The night of July 9, 1893, was a hot one in Chicago. A young man named James Cornish, a laborer, 24 years old, was brought to Provident Hospital after a knife fight. He had a stab wound to his chest. It looked on the surface manageable, a surface wound perhaps, but Cornish was deteriorating. His pulse was weak, his breathing labored. He was going into shock. Williams made the decision to open the chest. Understand what that decision meant in 1893. Cardiac surgery did not exist. The chest cavity was considered by virtually all of medicine to be inviolable, off-limits, too dangerous to enter. The heart was not something surgeons touched. You did not cut into a chest cavity. You certainly did not reach inside and suture tissue surrounding the heart. The prevailing belief, held by the most credentialed men in the field, was that any attempt to do so would kill the patient. Williams attempted it anyway. Without general anesthesia as we understand it today, ether was used, but its reliability and depth of effect in 1893 bore no resemblance to modern anesthesia practice. Without antibiotics, which were still 4 decades away. Without the imaging tools, the cardiac monitors, the suturing materials we now take for granted. He had his training, his instruments, his hands, and his judgment. He opened James Cornish's chest and found a wound to the pericardium, the fibrous sac encasing the heart. He sutured it. He closed the chest. And James Cornish, against everything the medical establishment believed possible, lived. Cornish was discharged from Provident Hospital 51 days later. He lived for another 50 years. What Williams had done was not a lucky intervention. He wrote up the case. His notes were precise, clinical, detailed. The procedure was documented and published in 1897 in the medical record, one of the most respected medical journals of the era. The paper was clear. Here is what was done, here is why it worked, here is the anatomical logic. It was not speculation. It was not anecdote. It was a surgical case record. For a brief period, the story circulated. Williams received some recognition. He was appointed surgeon-in-chief of Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C., in 1894, a position of genuine prestige, overseeing what was then the largest hospital for Black patients in the country. He was, by the standards of his peers, an accomplished and respected figure. But medicine was also a political institution, and its politics were about to catch up with him. In 1902, Williams returned to Chicago. He joined the staff of Cook County Hospital and St. Luke's Hospital, integrated institutions, where he had previously been excluded. His skills were undeniable. But he had also made enemies, most notably a man named George Cleveland Hall, a fellow Black physician in Chicago who had grown antagonistic toward Williams over professional rivalry. Hall used his connections with Booker T. Washington, then one of the most influential Black Americans in the country, to undermine Williams's standing at Provident, the hospital Williams had founded. The institutional politics were brutal. Williams was eventually pushed out of a central role at Provident, his own institution, through a campaign that was partly personal and partly ideological. And as his influence in Chicago's Black medical community was being eroded, the larger white medical establishment was doing something equally damaging to his legacy. It was simply failing to remember him. In 1910, 10 years after Williams's surgery on James Cornish, a white surgeon in Montgomery, Alabama, named Luther Leonidas Hill performed a similar operation, suturing a stab wound to the heart of a young boy. Hill's procedure was widely covered. It was celebrated. He was described in newspaper accounts and later in some medical histories as a pioneer of cardiac surgery. The framing, in some sources, positioned Hill's operation as the landmark, not Williams's. This is where measured history must be precise. The documentary record does not show Luther Hill claiming to have been first. The erasure of Daniel Hale Williams was not necessarily Luther Hill's doing. What happened was quieter, and in some ways more insidious than a deliberate theft. It was institutional indifference. It was the gravitational pull of a medical establishment that defaulted to crediting those it already recognized. Those who trained at the right schools, published in the right journals, operated in the right hospitals, and happened to be the right color. Williams had done all of these things, but one quality he could not provide was whiteness. And so, over the decades, as the history of cardiac surgery was assembled, his case was footnoted or omitted while Hill's received the headline. There is something precise and terrible about that process. Nobody had to conspire. Nobody had to burn a file or rewrite a paper. The erasure happened through the ordinary mechanics of institutional memory. Who gets invited to write the textbooks, whose name appears in the index, whose hospital affiliation carries weight when the citation is chosen. Williams built his own hospital because he had to. And because he had to, it was never the kind of institution whose imprimatur impressed the gatekeepers of American medicine. The proof that Williams came first is not contested among serious medical historians. The dates are not in dispute. July 9, 1893, his paper in the medical record, 1897, Cornish's discharge records from Provident. These are not recovered documents or revisionist claims. They were always there. The Medico-Chirurgical Society of the District of Columbia acknowledged the procedure. Colleagues who witnessed the case were alive and speaking for decades afterward. The evidence was never hidden. It was simply not elevated. And Williams kept working. He did not spend the later decades of his life in public agitation over the credit. He trained surgeons. He mentored young Black physicians. He was one of only a small number of Black charter members of the American College of Surgeons when it was founded in 1913. He continued to publish, to operate, to advance the craft. He was not sitting in bitterness waiting for acknowledgement. He was doing the work. He died on August 4, 1931, in Idlewild, Michigan, following a stroke. He was 74 years old. His will left the bulk of his estate to the NAACP. Even at the end, his resources went toward the architecture of equity. Recognition, when it came slowly, unevenly, and incompletely. In 1970, 39 years after his death, the United States Post Office issued a commemorative stamp bearing his image as part of its Black Heritage series. Schools in Chicago and Washington carry his name. A 1968 biography by Helen Buckler, Daniel Hale Williams, Negro surgeon, brought wider public attention to his story. Medical historians in the latter half of the 20th century have, with increasing clarity, repositioned Williams's 1893 operation as the documented first in cardiac surgical history. But the textbook problem persists. If you look at how cardiac surgery's lineage is narrated in many standard medical histories, Williams is not always where he should be. The hierarchy of citation is slow to shift. Institutions protect their inherited narratives. And the casual version of history, the one that circulates in popular media and common knowledge, still, in many quarters, doesn't know his name. That is the particular cruelty of this kind of erasure. It doesn't announce itself. There's no visible wound. History simply moves forward wearing a different face, and the absence becomes normalized until the absence itself becomes invisible. What Daniel Hale Williams did on July 9, 1893, was not a product of genius alone, though genius was clearly present. It was the product of a man who had been refused entry to every room he needed and decided to build the rooms himself. He was turned away from hospitals, so he founded one. He was denied a place in mainstream medicine, so he helped create institutions that would train the next generation of Black physicians. He was operating at the absolute frontier of surgical possibility, without the safety nets that make modern cardiac surgery survivable for most patients, and he made it work. Not once. The Cornish case was documented and successful. The man lived. The question that lingers, the one worth sitting with, is not why Daniel Hale Williams was overlooked. That, sadly, is not a mystery. The question is what else we have accepted as settled history that isn't. How many other names are missing from the index? How many other surgeries, inventions, theories, and proofs are attributed to the man who came second because the man who came first didn't have the institutional backing to make his name stick? Williams understood, perhaps better than most, that medicine was not just a science. It was a social institution. He spent his life trying to reform it, not through argument alone, but through practice, through building, through the undeniable record of outcomes. A man walked out of Provident Hospital in September 1893 because Daniel Hale Williams trusted his own hands when no precedent said he should. That is the fact the history books owe him, not a footnote, not a commemorative stamp, though the stamp was deserved. The plain, unqualified truth: Daniel Hale Williams performed the first successful open-heart surgery in recorded history. He saved James Cornish's life. He did it in a hospital he built with his own institutional will because no one would let him through the door. The next time someone tells you the story of cardiac surgery, you know what name belongs at the beginning.